many of us have learned in one way or another to be suspicious of our own desires. Some of us were taught to follow them wherever they lead. Others were taught to hold them at a distance, to manage them, suppress them, or even to fear them. But what if our desires are not simply problems to solve or impulses to indulge? What if they are invitations? What if even the places in us that feel confusing or misdirected are trying to tell us something true about our lives, our stories, and our longing for God? Hello, friends. I'm Alan Fadling, and you're listening to the Unhurried Living Podcast, where we inspire you to rest deeper, live fuller, and lead better. In today's episode, I'm joined by Jay Stringer, therapist and author of the book, Desire. Together, we explore how our desires, both the ones we welcome and the ones we struggle with, can become pathways toward healing, honesty, and deeper connection with God. If you're listening to this podcast, I'd love for you to follow or subscribe. And if you're watching on YouTube, please consider subscribing there as well. It's free, it helps you stay in touch with us, and it also helps more people discover the Unhurried Living Podcast. My guest today is Jay Stringer. Jay is a licensed therapist, a speaker, and a researcher whose work focuses on the intersection of spirituality, sexuality, and emotional health. He's spent years helping people understand how their stories shape their desires, and how even the places we struggle with can become pathways toward healing. He's the author of Desire, The Longings Inside Us, and the New Science of How We Love, Heal, and Grow. In this book, Jay brings together clinical insight, personal story, and spiritual wisdom to help us see desire not simply as something to manage, but as something to understand. In our conversation today, we explore how our desires, especially perhaps the ones that confuse us or trouble us, that they can actually guide us toward greater wholeness, deeper relationships, and a more honest life with God. Let's jump now into that conversation. So, Jay, I'm just so glad to have this conversation with you. You've been helping many of us put language to parts of our lives that maybe we don't always know how to name. So thanks for being with us.
Alan, such an honor to be with you. Thank you for having me.
Well, I appreciate it. So as I read the book and as you begin it, you begin with the image of a kind of civil war within us when it comes to desire, that the same place in us that can give us joy can also lead to heartache. And so I wonder if you could help us understand that tension. Why does desire feel sometimes so conflicted for us?
Yeah, I think most of us recognize intuitively that desire has the potential to turn us into the best version of ourselves or the worst version of ourselves. And that right away just starts that civil war. So I have had desires to write good books. I've had desires to love my wife and kids deeply well. I've also desired to not have a wife and kids, to be able to be free from that. I have desired things that are holy and beautiful, but I have also desired pornography. I've also desired, I've had eating disorders in my past. I've had, a lot of conflicting desires inside of me. And so when I look at desire, I'm like, wow, this is responsible for all the best things in my life. And yet there have been so many desires within me that have also opened the door to shame, that have opened the door to heartache, that have opened the door to conflict and separation. And so I think a lot of us are just like, whoa, what do we do with desire? I don't want desire to get too hot. Don't want it to get, just burning, that it might consume myself or someone. But I also intuitively know that if I let desire die inside of me, I'm going to feel depressed and I'm going to feel like life is not worth living. And so I think most of us are trying to figure out like, okay, I need to stoke this flame a little bit, but not too much that it doesn't get out of hand. but also I need to keep some light, some heat going. Otherwise, I'm going to be cold, depressed, and just that sense of like resigning to the reality that life is not a good thing to have.
Yeah. Well, this is my experience. I wonder if it's the experience of some of our listeners, that I often feel like I live between sort of two extremes. And that I sort of see this in our culture too, that some feel like whatever we feel, whatever we desire, we just need to chase that down and make it happen. It's like undiscerning, in our relationship desire. But maybe in at least my kind of conservative faith tradition, often it kind of felt like desire is kind of suspect, and I probably ought to mostly resist it or suppress it or deny it. And so I wonder if you can talk some to that. Those seem to me to be extremes in the way we relate to desire.
And that's what we're navigating. And that's, I mean, as a licensed mental health counselor, ordained minister, that's what I began to find clients trying to navigate. Is that I would say a lot of my clients came from that conservative background where they were taught, the heart is deceitfully wicked, who can trust it? And so that led them to the suppression of desire, to try and manage their desires. And so it was this fear of like, if you actually lived well into desire, you're going to turn out to be a very selfish person, or God forbid, you might want something sexual. And so then, those clients became adults, and it was kind of like, okay, we've been in a system of suppression, of trying to manage everything. That soundbite is no longer attractive. And then you start hearing messages in culture that are, I love the poet Mary Oliver when she says, what is it that you want to do with this one wild and precious life that you've been given? And that wakes something up of like, what do I want to do with my life? And so it's this invitation to pursue desire. And yet, unless you want to eat, pray, love your way through life, that was there was no guidance about how to actually want well. And so then you start following your desires, as you said really well, like you are undiscerning with your desires. And then where do you end up? Well, you end up with, on some hedonic treadmill of pleasure, and you're trying to, go after success. You're trying to go after pleasure. And then you find that the pleasures that you're after aren't satisfying, like the Michelin meals, the luxury travel that you thought was going to fulfill you is like, been to too many Michelin restaurants. They're all the same. And so these things that you thought you wanted begin to be less appealing in time. And again, back to that civil war of once we realize that, I think that's usually the place where we deaden our desire somehow. And so whether we're checking our phone a couple hundred times a day, whether we have an overt addiction, unwanted behavior, whenever you are struggling with your mental health, whenever you have some problem, whether it's a conflict, alcohol, porn, all of those things convince you that at some level, there's going to be judgment in your life. So it's not just about escape. It's about a sense of, judgment. There's something about me. There's something about what I want that I can't really trust. And I think that's what most of us live under, is that ceiling of, I can try and pursue the good, the true, and the beautiful every once in a while. But for the most part, there's a deadness in my life.
Oh, man.
So that's what I kept coming back to in the research and in my clinical practice, is like, no one has really taught people how to want well. And to do that well, you have to have a natural interrogation for why you want anything. And so I'm not trying to endorse like this free life of desire to do whatever you want, but I also don't think we need to pathologize desire at all either. And so when I think about, the parable of the talents, I think about that in terms of desire. It like, if the master has given people these talents, these desires, so many of us bury our desires. We bury the talents that God has given to us. And the master's harshest words are to those that suppress and bury the talents and the desires that they've been given. So I want to wake people up to how stunning and how powerful their desires are. But desires have to be formed if they're going to actually grow beauty and connection and purpose in your life. It doesn't just naturally happen because you are pursuing a desire. So this is really a roadmap of how do you actually desire well? What are the 5 core aspects of desire that everybody needs to experience and pursue in order to have a life of flourishing?
Absolutely. Well, I really loved these 5 core desires as you unpack them and describe them. I just think they're so essential. And I wonder if you could just say a little bit more about these 5 these various facets of desire that you've discovered and described.
Yeah, so I'll name the 5 real quick and then debrief some of them. So the 5 are a desire for wholeness, a desire for personal growth, a desire for intimacy, a desire for pleasure, and then a desire for meaning. And so part of what I would say is that these are not a la carte menu options that you get to pick or choose. But what happens a lot is that people wake up to desire and they might say, okay, I have a desire for wholeness. I need to understand my story. I need to understand the traumas that have marked my life. I need to understand my family of origin, where I come from. And so then you develop this amazing desire for wholeness and healing. And yet at the same time, you haven't actually desired your own personal growth. And so you're holding others hostage to, okay, I'm a wounded man or woman. Now I need other people to validate me. I have a sense of where I've been wounded, where life has been hard. But if that desire for healing doesn't move into a desire for personal growth and hospitality for one's struggles and intentionally pursuing growth, that's going to end up stalling. But then after personal growth is that movement into intimacy. And one of the realities that I wrote it in that particular order is that so many people want better friendships. They want a better marriage. They want better business connections. And yet they want intimacy, but they have never done the work of personal growth and differentiation to actually grow a self. So I always think about intimacy as like something similar to like going to a really good symphony in Los Angeles or New York. Like you want your violinist to be Juilliard trained. You want your percussion team to be world class. Because when you get to that symphony, it's full of differentiation. It's full of these individuals that have put their 10, 20,000 practice hours into developing themselves. But it's not about like, wow, that's an amazing drum solo. It's a sense of the harmony that's created through these differentiated people coming together to make music. And one of the things that I just kept finding in my clinical practice and in the research is you have all these people that want good organizations. They want good families. They want good marriages. And their desire for intimacy far exceeds their desire for personal growth. So that would be like, we want to make really good music on stage, but I don't want to practice to get there. And so that was part of, okay, we've got to understand our story to understand what real personal growth looks like. That's not about optimization or self-mastery. This is about hospitality for struggles and then intentional growth. And then after you develop differentiation, then intimacy is able to come. And then the fourth desire is that of pleasure. And, a lot of times people desire better sex, better experiences of, goodness, pleasure in their bodies. But they haven't done the previous work. And so they end up pursuing pleasure that kind of feels flat, feels meaningless. It feels like I'm just chasing something that feels addictive because it's not really about pleasure. It has far more to do with escape, or it has far more to do with escaping intimacy than it does actually creating it. And then after pleasure is this desire for meaning and purpose in our lives. And so just that sense of like, where does what are the passions inside of you? Like, have you studied your story enough to know what breaks your heart? Like, what is your hell no in life? Like, I will stand against this level of injustice. I will engage where there is silence, where there is corruption. Like that's something of my hell no. But then there's also this sense of, what do I want to say yes to? What has God put inside of me for what is good, true, and beautiful that I will sacrifice all my life to be able to see this glory, this beauty really begin to fill the earth. And so that's where I would say again, these are not a la carte menu options. We've got to choose all of them in different seasons of our life in order to actually have a life of connection, purpose, and love.
That's so beautiful. I love the sense of interplay, the interconnectedness, but I also appreciate maybe our tendency to get very attached to some one particular place of desire and isolate it and miss the connections that are sort of organic and holistic. And that's a beautiful vision.
Yeah, because you've probably experienced this too. You have you'll have very successful people that want to be Joan of Arcs in their career. They want to be the best CEO possible. And yet their marriages are imploding. Or you have some people that are they are just all-stars in their particular career. And yet what's driving them is a sense of pining for validation that back in their story is a boy or a girl who feels dumb, who feels stupid. And so instead of caring and developing a desire to grieve and to express tears for what the traumas that they have been through, that becomes a place that they over-index in meaning because that helps them feel better about their life. It helps them escape some of the crucibles that they need to be undergoing in their personal story or in their relationship. So all of us are over-indexed in one realm of desire and very underdeveloped in another. And those places that were underdeveloped are going to create symptoms. They're going to create misery. And so I want to help people develop a desire for something very unnatural, which is to desire growth in the places that you are struggling.
Yeah, that's so well said. One of my counselors would often say, all desire is God's idea. Desire is God-given energy, God-given impulse. The question is, am I learning what he meant it to be? Am I entering into the life that the way you've captured it, these various desires are wanting to move me into? And that's kind of something of what I hear you describing.
Yeah, Ronald Rolheiser, who's a theologian, that's part of what he says with desire. He says children are born with these beautiful raw desires, is how he refers to them. And so just that sense of all kids are going to be unformed in their desire. Misspelling is how we learn how to spell. Stumbling is how we learn how to walk. But when it comes to desire, you have a kid that expresses this desire. And you see it at the playground, right? Where when my kids were young, I remember kids that would be like, I want the truck. And it's my God, what is wrong with their parents? Do you realize that you're going to develop this petulant little kid? And it's why didn't I think, wow, that's a boy who really knows what he wants? And does that desire for the truck need to be refined and polished? Absolutely. But we don't need to pathologize the kid for wanting the truck or the girl for wanting the truck. We need to help them kind of cultivate this raw desire. And so Rolheiser uses the example of let's say a kid desires food and is really hungry. Well, part of the job of the community and the family is to connect that raw desire to the life of the community. So, okay, so you want a donut. Great. Let's not only get a donut for you, but let's try and bless someone by picking up a donut for a friend of ours. Or let's make 12 donuts and then have a play date and have friends over. So it's that sense of how do we work with these raw desires inside of us that are, as your mentor said, God's idea to begin with. But any desire has to be disciplined. It has to be formed if it's going to develop. And that's what I keep bumping up against is that, there's some desires that we baptize as virtuous, if you want to have a meaningful career or a great nonprofit, or do ministry,
Mhm.
like we will baptize those desires. And, you can kind of neglect even your kids and your family in the service of the kingdom.
Mm.
But, these other desires, if you actually just wanted time off, or if you wanted to like go on a amazing trip or take 30 days of, it's kind of like, oh, that's kind of a selfish desire there. So it's
Yeah.
anytime we're serving others, it's usually baptized, but some sense of exploration and time to kind of intentionally work on ourselves, to enjoy who we are. There's always some level of suspicion there.
Yeah, I see the same thing. So I think one of the insights that I appreciate that you're sharing with us is that you suggest even our unwanted or our confusing desires can actually be sort of clues to a good way forward for us. Can you say more about that, maybe using one or two of these five desires as you described them?
For sure. Yep. So part of where this theory is hanging upon is this French psychoanalyst, and I promise this isn't that boring. There's a guy by the name of Lacan, and he was a French psychoanalyst. And one of the things he said is that every person has a symptom. And in the French, symptom is like symptome. And what he says is every symptom is a saint-tome. Saint-tome is the French phrase for holy man. And so what Lacan is
Oh,
saying is that every symptom of your life is the holy man. It is the holy prophet that's trying to get your attention, and it will speak and it will continue to kind of express its symptoms until you learn how to listen. The complexity is we don't like our symptoms. I would rather have a gin and tonic. I would rather have Tylenol than to listen to what like my
right.
bad back might be saying. And so most of us try to annihilate our symptoms or treat them or get surgery for them or medicate them rather than saying, what is this pain? What is this symptom actually trying to communicate to me? So a couple examples would be, this came out of research from my first book, and then we continued it for this one. But, an issue like pornography, we could predict not just how much porn someone watched, but we could begin to predict the types of porn people would pursue based on the unaddressed realities of their life. So
Oh,
that's how
wow.
we knew we struck a nerve in the research was, uh, people would write into my team from all over the world and say, like, do you think Jay could interpret this sexual fantasy? And again, most people never want to talk about that stuff. And
Oh,
yet there
yeah.
was something about engaging curiosity where it's like our desires are not random. Even our unhealthy, unwanted sexual behaviors are not random. Embedded in the very behavior that you are trying to escape are clues to your healing and to your growth. So an example of that would be we found that some men who wanted, you know, uh, porn that had to do with someone younger than them, a petite body type, a race that suggested to them some level of subservience, those
Mm.
men had three key drivers. One was a strict father, one was a lack of purpose in their life, and then high levels of shame was the third. So if you just play
Oh,
armchair psychologist for a minute, if you're growing up with a strict father, part of what a strict father is doing is creating a master class in being powerless. And so pornography is not just about lust. It's not just about someone's attractive. It's that you have the ability to be exceedingly powerful. You can get exactly what you want when you want it. And so if you
mm,
grew up in a family system, a church system that created powerlessness and began to, make you feel like everything that you wanted was wrong, pornography gives you 10 minutes where you can have anything you want. And that
mm,
experience is so powerful. Or if you think about just a lack of purpose in your life, a lot of times it's that sense of like, I'm trying to get something started, but it's a dead lawnmower and I can't get this thing started no matter what I do. And that's part of the appeal to something like porn is that it gives you a place where you can get exactly what you want when you want it. You don't feel futility in that world.
mm.
And so that would be an example of, instead of just trying to fight against the desire for porn, fight to discover what's driving you to it in the first place. Yet most of us are trying to, do some version of lust management in our sexual life rather than really getting curious about that. Another example would be, we found that, marital conflict. We could predict that the couples that had the highest conflict in their relationships were 2.6 times more likely to be enmeshed within their family of origin systems. Or we also found that, couples that were able to talk about intimacy and touch and engage in these conversations were 18.9 times more likely to have a satisfying sexual relationship. Well, what's the dilemma? Is that a lot of times, a lot of us have never received the sex education. We don't know what turns us on. We don't feel comfortable revealing our erotic mind or asking someone else to reveal theirs. So if we don't have language, if we don't know how our bodies work, we're not going to be able to have good sexual lives. At the same time, a lot of the conflict that couples will undergo in a marriage has to do with loyalty issues, where they are still loyal to their mother or father, even if they don't like them. But maybe you grew up in a family system that, your dad, your mom wasn't very present to you, didn't see you. And so you learned how to escape through the world of video games or screens or some substance. Well, then when you get married, you're still loyal to that system of escape or maybe, high conflict. And so that is just another thing of, what are the marital problems that you're facing? How are they signals? How are they trying to get your attention? That those are the holy men that we're facing as well. But you can do that in any realm of life. I know I'm over indexing right now and talking about sex and arousal, but this is true in meaning and purpose. It's true in intimacy. Any problem that you are facing is not a life sentence to struggle or shame. It's an invitation to healing and growth. And the struggle will show you the way to healing.
That is such, to me, that's such a hopeful vision. And it sort of takes you out of that, tunnel of, you called it lust management. There's all other forms of that sort of thing, problem solving oriented. But one of the things I notice in my own journey is often shame plays a really powerful role in keeping me stuck or keeping me hidden. Imagine many of our listeners can identify with that. How does shame distort our relationship with desire?
Yeah. Oh man, it's such a good question. I mean, shame is to desire kind of what cancer is to the body. It's going to erode it. And so, when you think about shame, the way that the neuroscientists talk about shame is, like a manual transmission car. So you have, the gas pedal, the brake, and the clutch. And so what ends up happening to us is that we are born with these raw desires, as we referenced earlier, to go into the world, to touch, to taste, to see. We want to drive. We want to put our, pedal to the metal, as they say, and just explore the world around us. Children have a fairly developed sympathetic nervous system. That's the gas pedal. Children do not have a parasympathetic nervous system that's highly developed. They need parents. They need caregivers to be able to say, no, you can't wait up until midnight. No, you can't go to bed without brushing your teeth. Or no, you can't just have this now. We need to be able to kind of hit the brake. We need to hit the parasympathetic nervous system. But if you go to, a manual transmission car, and if you've ever driven one, what happens when you hit the brake without hitting the clutch is what? The engine kind of doesn't just gently die. It kind of shears off and it jolts forward. And that's what the neuroscientists say is happening with shame. It's that when the brake is applied, someone tells you no. Did they do it with the clutch of kindness? Or was there some slamming of the brake? And so a lot of the shame that we feel inside is we look at ourselves and we're just like, what a stupid idiot. And again, that's the slamming of the break, or someone says, "What in the world is wrong with you?" Or you say that to yourself. And again, those are all experiences where you slam on the brake without the clutch of kindness. The dilemma is embedded within some of the questions, like, what's wrong with me? Or what's going on? Why do I keep doing this? If you could actually not be full of contempt and actually allow it to be a question, it's a really good question. Like, why am I like this? Is very different than why am I freaking like this? And so
Oh,
shame is always trying to narrate our story with the worst possible explanation. It's ready to document everything in the court of law against us. But
mm,
what I have found in my research, in my own life, is that we don't just pursue behaviors to provide an escape. We actually pursue behaviors that reinforce the core messages of shame about us. So I grew
mm.
up, Donut was my nickname in middle school. So I came to, middle school, first day of seventh grade, eating a jelly donut. That jelly donut dripped on my shirt and there was a jelly stain. And this kid by the name of Brian Mulroney, put his finger into my belly and did the Pillsbury Doughboy giggle. And everybody at the bus stop laughed. And so that
Oh,
sense of the shame that I felt in that moment wasn't just because Brian Mulroney did that. It was also because there were all these places in my life that I felt like I was unwanted, that I was unlovable, that there was, and so many of my behaviors throughout my life are attempts to reinforce that story. And so what all of us need to do is we need to be able to say, what are the 4 or 5 core messages that shame is telling us about who we are? And what are the stories? What are the actual stories that if we had to draw a portrait or if we were a filmmaker and had to make the scene, how do we understand the core stories that have most informed that belief? Because the brain is a anticipation machine. And so it's always creating reality in light of what it begins to anticipate life should be. So if I believe that I'm unwanted or unlovable, if I believe my desires aren't going to be trusted, lo and behold, I will begin to pursue behaviors that confirm those core beliefs about us. And so,
oh,
really complicated way of going back to your question, which is any, belief, any negative belief, any shameful belief that you hold about yourself, you will create evidence in the court of law against you that those messages are true. And so you have to go to intentionally disempower the voice of shame. You have to turn towards it and say, okay, where do you come from? What are the stories that most need my engagement and my kindness in order to begin to challenge this voice of shame?
yeah, that's so well said. So you've mentioned how our story, namely how we've grown up and experiences we've had along the way, shape us so profoundly. And then some of those stories sort of stick and we embellish them and then they run our lives. I think of myself, I kind of grew up managing my life by focusing on my thinking more than on my feeling or my emotion. I didn't trust my feeling. I had reasons for that in the family in which I grew up. And so I realized I'm more comfortable thinking about my desires than experiencing my desires. And then my desires sort of leak out in ways that I didn't realize they were doing. Can you say a little bit more about that sort of experience that maybe some of us are having?
Yes. I mean, it's so well said. And just that image of it, again, what are the stories that begin to inform why it's tough to have emotions or to be in a
Mm,
body? And so, Dan Siegel says that kids need 4 S's in order to flourish. They need to be seen, safe, soothed, and secure. And so that sense of, did you have a mother or a father that saw you? And being seen is about attunement. And what we need is we need parents that are attuned to our grief, to our heartache. Like when I came home from middle school that day, no doubt in my mind, my face was not as bright as when I left for school that day with a donut. I was excited. First day of school. I have my new Nike windbreaker on. But it's that sense of, okay, my face changed. I know that my mom and my dad did not engage that. Also think about the places that you were very excited. Like what clothes did you love? What amusement parks? What dishes? What drinks did you love? And did you have a mother or father that really saw those things? And if you don't have that sight, or, the category of soothing, to jump to the third S, if your parents are not soothing you, and far more, if they are a place of dysregulation, that has profound impacts on where you're going to go. So thinking can become a form of soothing, that I don't want to engage my body. But if I think, and if I just go off into my own world and do a deep dive into this or books or ideas, then some way I have created something of a protective barrier from the assaults of my feelings, that maybe my feelings were too much for my family. And so my mom and my dad dismissed them, or I had really intense feelings and they shamed them. So it became protective in order for some people to just, dwell in the world of ideas and have that sense of oxytocin come through ideas. And then you get good grades, and then people value you for your ideas. And then it reinforces the loop of like, yes, I'm a really good thinker, but I can't really trust my feelings. Well, if you had as many practice hours in your feelings as you did in your thinking behavior, you would actually be really good at feeling. But the dilemma is all of us have developed a provisional self. And that's not our full self, but it's a self that helps us navigate our world. And so similar to you, Alan, I remember being in about 8th grade and was with my dad at a Chesapeake bagel bakery. And he knew I was struggling in school, asked me if I wanted to talk, got to the bagel shop, had almost nothing to say. Like, I don't know how to open up. And part of what my dad said to me that day was, Jay, if you were an elder in my church, I don't think I would continue to meet with you because of how little you said. So compounding nature of trauma, that these kids are bullying me, and then I have a dad that says something like that. Well, my relationship with my dad kind of plummets around that time. But by my senior year in high school and all throughout college, I was starting to read dead theologians. And what I found is that the deader, the better, as they say. The more I was reading Jonathan Edwards, Luther, the more theologically minded I became. My relationship with my dad flourished. So part of my provisional self in the world is I'm a good therapist. I recognize when my mom is in something, and I would offer ideas and insights and care to her. But also, I have an MDiv. I'm an ordained minister. I know how to have theological conversations. So all of that became something of my provisional self, which was, if I am really good to people, primarily women, that will get me through life. And then if I can have deep theological conversations that are, about dead theologians or ideas or creeds, confessions, theological drama in the world, I can do really well in those rooms as well. And it works until it's like, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm done at that post. Like, can I please leave this post? I don't want to work that job for the rest of my life. And then that's what creates a midlife crisis, or a midlife chrysalis, as I've been calling it, to just kind of be able to say, okay, where do I come from? But also, what would a life of integrity and passion and desire look like if I'm not just playing the parts that I'm supposed to be playing?
Yeah, that's so well said. I really appreciate that. So, as we come to a close of our conversation, and maybe some of our listeners are hearing our interaction and hearing something in what you're saying that really resonates. It rings true. It sounds, familiar. I wonder if you could just talk about what's some small, simple next step that a listener might take to move them forward in the healing of desire or in the realignment of desire with God's intent for it?
Yeah. Yeah. So I would say, pay attention to, I'll kind of use two words like the bells and then pay attention to the albatrosses. So the bells, like Annie Dillard, who's a Pulitzer Prize winning author, she said something along the lines of, I never knew I was a bell until the moment I was lifted up and struck. And so that sense of like, what are the bell-like moments that have been indelible for you? That could be in your career, that could be in your family, that could be as a young boy or girl. And so that sense of like, when did you feel most alive? When did you feel most connected to who you are? And as you write down 3 or 5 of those bell-like moments, certain themes are going to emerge with regard to how to more deeply honor and live in alignment with those desires. But then we also have these albatrosses that are flying around, and that could be conflict in a marriage, that could be a sense of meaninglessness, that could be a self-sabotage behavior of just not liking our body or our choices or just kind of feeling lonely. And so whatever those albatrosses are, instead of just trying to solve them or fix them or medicate them or ignore them, really plan out a season of intentionality to be able to say, I wonder why this symptom is emerging. And what is this symptom? How is it actually trying to serve me? What is it? How can it become something of a holy man in my life? And so I think that's really what we need to kind of start, is that the human heart changes with regard to particularities. So we don't change by saying like, I was sexually abused, or, I want more passion in my life, or I want more desire, or I want this to happen in my marriage. You have to enter into the specifics of any of those particular themes. And so the more that the brain names what is true, the freer it will become. So I think just pay attention to where the bells are ringing, because those desires have been placed into you, and it is your adult duty to develop them, to curate them, to really experience the goodness and beauty of those desires. But then there's also some desires in your life that are probably wreaking havoc, and you need to change your approach with regard to how you engage them. So, it is the kindness of God that leads to repentance and change.
Yes.
Not willpower, not hatred, not ignorance. The more kind we can become to the difficulties of our life, the more change we will experience. So offer radical hospitality to everything inside you that is broken, hurting, and undone. And you will have a very dramatically different life than the one that you currently have.
That is such a gracious and hopeful invitation. Well, again, today my guest has been Jay Stringer, and we've been talking about his book, Desire, The Longings Inside Us and the New Science of How We Love, Heal, and Grow. Jay, it's just been a great pleasure to talk with you today.
Likewise, Alan, so good to meet you, and appreciate your questions and bringing me a little bit into your story and thinking as well. So grateful for your mind.
Thanks again. Thank you for listening to the Unhurried Living Podcast. To learn more about us, visit unhurriedliving.com. In the show notes, you'll find helpful links and information about our partner, Life Audio, and all of their other faith-centered podcasts.